Unless you live in one of those marvels of the modern age, a city with decent mass transit, well-defined cycle routes, and most things within walking distance, the chances are you've got a car. It might be new. It might be, well, let's just say experienced. It might even have been around longer than you, and you might hate the fact that you have to use it to get anywhere. Unless, of course, you live somewhere even more progressive, where people have realised that giving everyone easy access to good public transit, whether they're in a city suburb or even in the middle of nowhere, actually makes the world a better place. In which case, I both envy you and I applaud your government. But most countries don't work that way. In large parts of the world, trains, if they exist, are unreliable, overpriced, or just inconvenient. The rolling stock? Old and falling apart. And the buses? Noisy, smelly, and sharing the road with private vehicles and then running to irregular schedules and serving only a few main roads so far away from where you live that it's quicker to just drive. And as for cycle paths, they're either non-existent or wedged between 18-wheelers and oversized SUVs. So you end up with a car, and with that car comes all of the usual costs: fuel, maintenance, registration, insurance, and of course, taxes. In most places, the tax portion of vehicle ownership, which might show up in several different ways, gets pooled by your country and sometimes by your state, county or municipality to help pay for all sorts of things, including the road you drive on. And that's not a new idea. Public roads and the taxes to fund them have been around almost as long as cars themselves. In the early 1900s, when motor cars were still the playthings of the rich, most roads were maintained by local governments or even farmers, often through labour rather than money. And the arrival of the affordable car, in the form of the Ford Model T, changed that. Suddenly, the public wanted better, longer-lasting roads, so governments stepped in. First with simple vehicle registration fees, then with fuel taxes. They appeared in the US in the 1910s and 1920s and then quickly spread around the world. The logic was simple. The more you drive, the more fuel you use, the more you pay towards keeping the roads in good shape. But over time, governments realised that it was much more convenient for them if, rather than tying those fuel and ownership taxes just into roads, they instead put the proceeds into general taxation pots and used it for whatever was necessary. And while owners often think that they're paying road tax or that gas tax goes back to roads, it rarely does. It's often poured into whatever community resource has the most need. And now, as we move away from the internal combustion engine towards electric power, the link between miles driven and taxes paid is breaking down even more. I think it's important to note at this point that while gasoline vehicle owners will often point to fuel taxes and complain that EV owners haven't been paying their fair share thanks to the massive government subsidies that keep fossil fuel costs remotely affordable and the fact that gasoline causes massive amounts of societal damage in terms of health costs, environmental damage, and even just damage to the physical infrastructure from pollution, the claim that gasoline taxes have ever been near enough to pay their way is bovine byproduct, but I'm going to dig into that later, so keep watching. For EV owners who don't buy petrol or diesel, that second source of revenue for local and national governments disappears, and that's led politicians around the world to look for other ways to get their pound of flesh. In just the last few years, we've seen Aotearoa New Zealand introduce RUCs, road usage charges, for all EV owners. We've seen the governor of the US state of Oregon sign into law a new policy that, from 2027, will charge EV owners more per year to register their vehicle or, at the owner's discretion, replace that with a 2.3 3 cents per mile tax on their travel within the state. And the UK government just announced its own intent to charge EV owners 3 pence per mile driven as part of its recent budget. And I've only just picked 3 examples. There are many more. And given the data we're seeing, they not only serve to disincentivise people from going electric, but they actively increase pollution too. Here at Transport Evolved, we think it's only fair that everyone pays their share towards road upkeep. But the truth is, the whole issue of road taxation is far more complicated, nuanced and messy than some of the anti-EV talking points you'll hear online. What's more, the solutions being proposed, and in some cases already implemented, to make EV drivers pay more aren't always as fair or effective as they sound. So today, we're going to dive into that thorny topic, alternative EV taxation. We'll ask if they're fair, look at how they actually work, and explore whether per-mile taxation is really the answer, or just another political pothole. Oh, and I'll also bust wide open, with receipts, the myth that only fossil fuel taxes pay for the local roads to be maintained, because in most of the world, that simply isn't true. To get this whole thing moving, let's start with the concept of fossil fuel taxes and both the historical and current reasons for them. As I mentioned in my introduction, it's common around the world for taxes to be added to the price of your fuel on top of normal sales tax. At the outset, these taxes are basically a usage fee. The more you drive, the more fuel you use, and the more revenue your driving generates. Simple, straightforward. But over time, fossil fuel taxation has become complicated. Taxation is levied not just on gasoline, but on other fossil fuels, including, in much of the world, fuels for air transportation. Interestingly, exactly when a fuel is taxed can be a real headache. For example, in many countries, fuel used for agriculture, i.e. in tractors and farm machinery, is exempt from tax, but that exemption only applies in certain specific circumstances, certain vehicles, certain uses, and sometimes limited road travel to get from one part of a farm to another. And while you might assume this is because farmers don't use the roads, in many parts of the world, even if you never take a vehicle on a public highway, you still pay tax on that fuel just like everyone else. So, fossil fuel taxation isn't just a road usage charge, it's also a pollution charge, a way to offset the societal costs of burning fossil fuels. In countries where people still trust the scientific method, or at least haven't declared war on thermodynamics, fossil fuel taxes trend higher. Even in the US, where a worrying number of lawmakers now treat climate science like it's witchcraft, policy analysts have historically supported higher fuel taxes because they reduce pollution and fund essential infrastructure. Granted, I'm going to cite evidence from before the current anti-science climate change is a hoax mania had airtime, but here's a particular receipt. A December 7th, 2022 Congressional Budget Office report in the US, which notes that a mere 5% increase in US fossil fuel tax would have reduced the federal budget deficit by $389 billion between 2023 and 2027 and dramatically cut greenhouse gas emissions. Had those proposals been enacted, combined with a reduction or elimination of fossil fuel subsidies for large multinational oil companies, something the Environmental and Energy Study Institute has pushed for literally decades, we would be living in a very different world. But we're not. Unless you've got a DeLorean under tarps in your backyard, complete with a Mr. Fusion and fully charged flux capacitors, I fear this timeline isn't going to magically change away from the Biff Tannen in the White House scenario. Obviously, EVs, while responsible for some emissions during their lifetime like any vehicle, are inherently cleaner. As the IEA has shown over many studies, an average 2020s EV emits 20 to 22 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over its lifetime, compared with more than double that for internal combustion vehicles. Yes, EVs are more emissions intensive to manufacture, but those upfront emissions are quickly offset once the car is on the road. And that's before you even look at the societal benefits. A March 2024 study in Science of the Total Environment found that each EV replacing an ICE vehicle in Shanghai, China, generated between $2,000 and $14,700 equivalent in health and climate benefits, including reduced healthcare costs, fewer lost workdays from pollution-related illnesses, and more. So those calling for EV owners to pay their way clearly aren't thinking about pollution taxes, and from the societal savings from transitioning fleets to electric vehicles, well, they completely outweigh any potential revenue from per-mile EV taxation. So what is really going on? I'll share my personal opinion a little later, but first let's examine the oft-cited argument for EV taxation, that EV owners should pay for the roads they use. And to do that, we need to look at how much money from gasoline and diesel taxes actually goes towards road upkeep, or rather, how most road projects are funded. Advocates of per-mile charging or higher EV taxes often claim that all the road programs in the country are funded by fuel taxes, implying EVs are freeloaders. The reality is murkier. In the US, for example, most road maintenance and construction funding comes from other sources outside of gasoline and diesel taxes. It does vary by state and sometimes by city, but across all 50 US states, the average highway funding from fuel taxes is 26%. The rest, it comes from property taxes, sales taxes, and federal government transfers, which still provide the lion's share. Although it does vary widely. In Tennessee, for example, it has one of the highest proportions of fossil fuel tax going towards road upkeep at 64.7% of its road maintenance and highways budget. New Jersey, at the other extreme, relies on fuel taxes for only about 9.9% of its road spending. In other parts of the world, that same figure can range from near 0 to 25% on average in Europe, although some outliers like Latvia, Lithuania and Switzerland can have those figures anywhere from 50% to more than 80%. But as we are such fans of saying at this channel, context is queen. Or at least slaying some epic heels and the latest black eyeliner that would make the Vice President retreat to his couch for some alone time. Tennessee has over 95,000 miles of public roads. New Jersey, only around 39,000 miles, less than half. So Tennessee's 64.7% figure is spread across a massive, mostly rural road network where traffic is lighter, but maintenance costs per mile are still significant. Fuel tax revenue is a big part of that budget simply because other local tax sources are smaller and the roads are long. New Jersey, far fewer road miles, but far higher per mile maintenance costs. Dense traffic, bridges, tunnels, and urban highways all add those costs up. The state leans heavily on general funds, tolls, and other taxes to pay for road upkeep, and fuel taxes make up just a small slice of the pie. So if someone comes up to you and says that New Jersey should implement a EV road tax program, well, just share that data with them and tell them to forget about it. TLDR? Well, fuel tax share alone doesn't tell the whole story. You also need to consider a few other things. How many roads there actually are, how much it costs to maintain them, and how much traffic drives on them. EV taxation isn't a one-size-fits-all scenario, and anyone who tells you is clearly missing the point. Okay, so I've highlighted the fact that gas taxes are not only no longer a road usage charge, but a pollution charge, and I've also highlighted that the majority of road maintenance budgets in many places around the world comes from other revenue sources. So now let's look at how much money is being lost from budgets based on EV adoption. Is it really as large as people say? To start, it's important to note that most legislatures considering usage charges have admitted this isn't being caused solely by more EVs on the road. Improvements in ICE efficiency play a big role as well. Believe it or not, cars are just getting more fuel efficient. And in my own adopted home state of Oregon, the combination of rising EV adoption and more efficient ICE vehicles has led the state legislature to project a $340 million loss in fossil fuel tax revenue over the next 10 years, while the state transportation budget itself is already staring at a $354 million shortfall over the next 2 years. The legislature and the state governor see per-mile EV taxation as one potential way to bridge that gap. Yet, as I have already pointed out, healthcare benefits from EVs far outweigh lost revenue from fossil fuel taxation. And again, more receipts. A study submitted to the state's legislature by the Oregon Department of Energy found that transitioning medium and heavy-duty fleets, think big rigs, not personal cars, to electric, would avoid, wait for it, $1.1 billion in health costs between 2020 and 2050. Sure, that's not the same as passenger vehicles, but the lesson is clear. When planning budgets, you have to consider the full picture: pollution reductions, health savings, climate benefits, not just quick fix revenue grabs. Otherwise, well, you risk chasing band-aids while missing the bigger opportunity, something Oregon, the UK, and many other places appear to be flirting with right now. Oh, and if you'll permit me, in places where the electrical grid is reasonably low emission, like the US Pacific Northwest, where Portland is based, the healthcare benefits of having electric vehicles are even more amplified than in regions still heavily reliant on fossil fuels for their electricity generation. In those cases, a smarter way to bridge any loss in fossil fuel tax revenue would be to focus on pollution, not use. But let's pause for a moment and tackle another common argument for EV taxation: vehicle weight. It's no secret that EVs, especially large pickups, can weigh more because of their massive battery packs. But for many more sensibly sized vehicles, think hatchbacks, sedans and small SUVs, there's far less of a weight disparity between EVs and ICE vehicles. The types of EV people actually drive the most, think Tesla Model 3, Tesla Model Y, Kia EV6, Volkswagen ID4, to name just a few, aren't massively overweight compared to similarly sized ICE vehicles. Large EVs are the problem here, both for pedestrian safety and road wear, and I say that as someone with a Ford F-150 Lightning who does everything I can to use it responsibly, not just for a quick jaunt to the shops. The largest EVs are heavier than their ICE rivals. My F-150 Lightning is about 1,500 pounds heavier than a comparable ICE F-150. I would absolutely back a higher charge for larger vehicles of all types using the roads, ideally through registration tied to the vehicle's gross vehicle weight rating. But that's a complicated and difficult thing to implement. But is it any more complicated and difficult than per-mile taxation? At any rate, complicated and difficult doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. If it needs to be done, we should be finding a way. The key point here, then, is that current proposals and implementations in some places around the world are based on fuel type, not vehicle weight, and that means that small, lightweight, efficient EVs are being lumped in with massive, oversized electric pickup trucks, at least on paper, because of that easily disproven weight argument. But I feel like I'm digressing, so let's talk about fairness. Is it fair to punish EV owners for driving electric when this isn't just about EV ownership? As you might expect me to say, in a word, no. I mean, I don't expect that you would have expected me to have said anything else. I do, after all, run a YouTube channel focusing on EV ownership and cleaner, greener, safer, smarter and more equitable transportation and energy. But I also know that you expect more from me on this, so let's dig a bit. What would this really mean for an EV owner? And again, while there are many places around the world exploring EV per mile taxation, I hope you'll allow me to use Oregon as an example, because I live here. Oregon's newly signed law comes into effect in 2027, replacing the current voluntary Origo system with mandatory per-mile taxation for EV owners. ICE vehicles can still use Origo voluntarily in exchange for a lower biannual registration fee, but let's keep that focus on EVs. Starting in July 2027, EV owners renewing registrations and new EVs registered after January 2028 will be given a choice. They can either pay a flat $340 per year registration fee or pay 2.3 cents per mile driven in the state. This is the same, by the way, for plug-in hybrids. If they choose the per mile option, they'll either have to install a telematics dongle in their car's OBD2 port, allow Origo to monitor their driving through their car's built-in telematics, or submit photo proof of their odometer reading every month. And at the same time, gas taxes in the state are also going up from 37 cents per gallon to 40 cents per gallon. It's worth noting that in some countries around the world, similar road usage charges have caused major headaches for EV owners, backlogs, administrative chaos, and mountains of paperwork as governments tried to get these systems running smoothly. Now, Oregon already has its Origo framework in place, which should help. But we can still reasonably assume that other states or countries bringing in similar schemes will face comparable technical and administrative hurdles before they become functional. Now we know how much this is all going to cost per mile, we can look at the fairness. Based on rough data from the last few years, Portland drivers, that's the majority of Oregon's population because it happens to be in the Portland metro area, drive around 540 miles per month on average. But of course, that doesn't include those who commute to and from Vancouver, Washington, or up from Salem, and there are significant numbers of people who do that. But let's add a little bit for those folks, say 700 miles total a month, and we would be looking at an average fee of $16.10, just under $195 a year to drive an EV, regardless of size, range, or miles per kilowatt hour efficiency. Now let's compare that to someone driving an ICE vehicle with an average fuel economy of 25 miles per gallon, which is fairly common for vehicles in these parts. Oregon's state gas tax, at the point this new EV tax comes into play, will be 40 cents per gallon. Multiply that by 28 gallons for 700 miles a month, and you're paying roughly $11.20 per month, or about $134 per year. So if you do the maths, and the same distance in a gas car costs significantly less than an EV paying per mile. And if you want freedom from someone, namely the local government, knowing exactly how far you drive every day, then you have to pay more per month because you have to pay that flat fee. In short, on paper, it's certainly not equitable. And yes, the eagle-eyed will note my maths didn't include the 18.4 cents of federal gas tax per gallon pumped in Oregon. That goes back to the federal government, not the state, and it doesn't necessarily come back to Oregon for road maintenance programs. Instead, it goes into the giant government pot for all the things that President Trump deems important, like funding masked enforcers whose sole purpose seems to be enacting a nationwide campaign of Himmlerian cruelty to hurt, destroy, and terrorize those the administration believes unworthy. I'm focusing on Oregon's scheme in this video, but based on what I've seen, I haven't found any programs significantly different enough from what's been written into law here to be worthy of note in this video. They all basically seem to penalise EV ownership under the guise of recouping lost revenue. Environmental and societal benefits be damned, at least in the short term, because while they are far larger than the current shortfall, they aren't easily cashable at the bank of spending. And Oregon has big pressures on its transportation budget right now. Lowering road quality, increased upkeep costs, and a desperately needed new interstate bridge over the Columbia that, yet again, looks doomed to failure. By the way, if you want a good video on that topic, check out Road Guy Rob's videos on the storied and complicated history of Portland roadways and bridges. They're very good. So, I've established it's unfair, but are people actively complaining? Is there much in terms of pushback? Well, there's a vocal majority of people furious about the increasing gas tax, and I've already seen multiple groups calling for the governor to be recalled over this issue. But comparatively, there's very little pushback against the EV tax, simply because EV owners are a smaller slice of the electorate, and it is no secret that laws disproportionately affect those perceived to have fewer resources to fight back. We've talked about the why, and we've talked about the how, and we've talked about fairness. But now let's talk about the who. And I'm not talking about the band. Because while EV taxation is often couched as something about fairness for ICE vehicle owners and all taxpayers, it's also yet another lever for interests with deep pockets to influence EV adoption rates. Take Aotearoa New Zealand, for example. A change from a progressive to a conservative government a few years ago led to the elimination of EV purchase incentives and the imposition of road usage charges, RUCs. The month before the incentives ended and RUCs were imposed, the country set new EV sales records. Now, not so much. Dealerships are heavily discounting EVs in certain areas just to clear them off their forecourts, and overall sales have slowed dramatically. Paying 76 Kiwi dollars per 1,000 kilometres driven, not to mention the hassle of filing that paperwork, has hit would-be buyers where it hurts. People are still buying EVs, but those on the fence, the ones whose switch to electric could have dramatically improved national air quality and their pocketbooks, have been chilled. It's not a stretch to assume the same could happen in Oregon and other places around the world. I've already had conversations with friends who are talking about moving into Oregon, and they are genuinely worried about increased ownership costs for the EV they own, the EV they bought because it was cheaper for them to drive than a gasoline vehicle. And that's a real concern, and one that could slow EV adoption right when it's needed most. And who benefits from all of this? Folks. And I mean that both in terms of individuals and the corporations are people too sense who don't want EVs gaining ground, and companies that stand to profit from tech-heavy programs that require massive data processing. So think AI companies, huge dataset firms, bespoke software firms, and more. Now, we don't have a smoking gun linking a single company or individual to Oregon's new EV tax program. Not that we ever do, right? But there's significant evidence that per-mile EV taxation aligns perfectly with the interests of companies who want you to keep buying fossil fuels. The American Petroleum Institute, for example, has supported alternative fuel taxation programs while opposing EV incentives and EV-friendly policies. And usually they're couched in language like fairness for everyone. And by that I mean fairness for everyone except those not using vast amounts of fossil fuels. And remember, the oil and gas industry runs one of the largest political lobbying machines in the world. Think tanks, NGOs, and a host of industry-backed groups funnel money and influence into policy decisions like it's some high-stakes Monopoly game. Need numbers? I've got some. In the first half of last year, the fossil fuel industry spent $72 million lobbying US lawmakers. Then add in the Koch industry-funded Energy Equity Coalition, which sounds like it's neutral, but it's really about protecting fossil fuel interests, and then perennial opponents of cleaner energy programs like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which has been pushing EV fees for years. And well, you start to see the pattern. At the end of the day, there's no public ledger showing ExxonMobil or Chevron wrote checks that meant that Oregon House Bill 2025, the one bringing this new EV tax into law, were the folks responsible for it. But what we do have is a decades-long widespread trend of fossil fuel trade groups and industry-backed think tanks lobbying against EV incentives for fuel-neutral policies that definitely aren't neutral, and for equal treatment of all vehicles, which very carefully doesn't look at harms from one sort of vehicle. And that language lines up perfectly with laws imposing per mile or flat fees on EVs, both in Oregon and in other places around the world. And it's also worth noting, just for funsies, that Portland just approved the Zenith Energy Terminal along the Willamette River. Originally denied extensions to its land use permit last year, the city has now approved the facility, despite concerns from residents, geological experts. The terminal sits in a liquefaction zone and Portland is due for a major earthquake anytime now, environmentalists and tribal leaders. All while the US administration threatens to withhold federal funding if local decisions don't go its way. Makes you wonder whose interests are really driving these decisions, eh? To finish, my personal opinion. I am all for EVs paying their way for road upkeep. I'm all for heavier EVs and larger vehicles of all types paying more to register. But I'm not okay with using fairness as an excuse to ignore the wildly unequal playing field the oil and gas industry enjoys, from trillions in subsidies around the world every year to the incalculable damage done to this pale blue dot. We need cleaner, greener, more equitable transportation, fast, reliable public transit, safe urban mass transit, walkable cities, cycle paths, micromobility, fewer cars. Yes, fewer cars of all fuel types. Taxing EVs isn't the way to get there. It just keeps us stuck in this same problem loop we're already pretending doesn't actually exist. Thanks for watching today. You can connect with us on Patreon, Discord, Mastodon, Blue Sky, or through our website. Massive thanks to the amazing folks scrolling by right now. You are the reason we can stay independent and keep making content without corporate influence. Want to see your name listed here too? Support starts at just $1.50 a month, and you can now even gift memberships. And of course, a massive welcome to our newest members: Adam B., Andrew Brown, Tiara Graves, Philip Jackson, Dieter Mulhop, Noor Naif, Annie Onimus, Todd Plenis, Barus Sharati, Andrei Starsky, Ralph Stoltz, Richard Teague, Triple A He They, Lisa Vargi, Vicky Morales, Magpie Motors, and Travis Whitman. Thank you for joining up to support the channel. At this particular time in history when everyone's feeling the pinch, we are so grateful that you've joined the team, and that allows us to keep making great content. If you'd like to join them, you'll find our Patreon link below, or you can sign up via YouTube. If you're signing up for Patreon though, please go to the Patreon website. Do not use the Apple or Google app, since both take a big cut that hurts your wallet and reduces the income we receive. Prefer a one-off contribution? We've got Ko-fi, Bitcoin, a PO box, our swag store, and even an Amazon affiliate link, all great ways to make sure your money helps us. We post new videos every few days on the main channel, plus extras over on TE Take 2. And since YouTube comments, while open, aren't safe for us, the best way to chat with the team is through Patreon, Mastodon, Blue Sky, or our website, or in fact, our Discord chat. If you want more, the mighty algorithm thinks you'll like this video, but we'd love you to check out this one instead. Be awesome, be kind, be intentional, and never forget to resist. Keep evolving.